وسهلا بكل الذين ينضموا للاستماع إلى راديو بلدي، أول راديو عربي أمريكي ويعنى بقضايا العرب في المهجر. برامجنا في راديو بلدي كل يوم جمعة من 8 وحتى 9 صباحا مع ليلى الحسيني في بث حي ومباشر وعبر WNZK راديو 690 AM. صباح الخير بلدي، صباح الخير لكل مستمعينا.
Welcome to Radio Baladi, the first Arab, Middle Eastern and American simulcast radio show. Radio Baladi is broadcast every Friday morning on WNZK 690 AM from 8 until 9 Eastern Time on Good Morning Michigan with Layla Al-Husseini. Our call-in number 248-557-3300. And now, stay tuned for the best radio talk show on Arab and American issues with your host, Layla Al-Husseini.
I am Atif Abdel-Jawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Good morning. Ayatollah Khomeini in 1979 promised to export his revolution. His strategic goal was twofold: to promote the Shia branch of Islam and to reverse the defeat of the Persian Empire at the hands of the invading Arabs. Iran's goals are rooted in historical grievances. The Sunni-Shia schism is also rooted in a bloody grievance. Even its relationship with the U.S. today, it is rooted in a grievance that dates back to the 1950s when the U.S. toppled Mohammad Mossadegh, a nationalist leader. Tremendous amounts of treasury are being spent on policies that are rooted in ancient grievances, although Iran's oil cultural wealth can help build its prosperity for the Iranian people. How can Iran secure a brighter future, and why is it consumed by strategic goals that belong to the distant past? To discuss these and other questions, we have a group of distinguished guests. We have Ambassador Lincoln Bloomfield, former Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs. We have Mr. Khalil Hashim, journalist and publisher of Ya Michigan. Dr. Abdel Majid Qatranji, he is surgeon and political analyst. And Dr. Fahim Al-Hamid will join us later directly from Saudi Arabia. He is editor of Awqaz and Saudi Gazette. My first question goes to all my guests, and I will start with Ambassador Bloomfield. What is the single most important factor that shapes Iran's policies, or that's behind Iran's policies as we know them? Ambassador.
Well, good morning, and good morning to all of your listeners, my fellow Americans in the Detroit area, the Arab American community. It's an honor to speak to all of you. In my view, I look at Ayatollah Khomeini as a unique figure. Through the years preceding the 1979 revolution, there were positions taken by the clerics that Khomeini himself remained silent. And looking back on this one historical figure, it appears that he had a strong sense of a desire for power that was not shared by many of the clerics. And if you look today, you see that there are factions within the clerical establishment in Iran who are against the Ayatollahs taking such a political stance and essentially exercising sovereign power. Khomeini, I think, had a vision which was unique. He wanted to animate, as you say, the Shia world, the Persian Empire. But as Henry Kissinger said, is this a country or is it a cause? And it seems very clear to me that his territorial vision had very little relationship to Iran as it is understood among the nations of the world today. He not only aspired to take over southern Iraq and claim religious hegemony over Iraqis in southern Iraq, the Shia population, but all the way across in the direction of Jerusalem, Karbala to Quds. So I see him as a power-hungry individual who has created a huge amount of damage because he has neglected the Iranian people and has repressed anyone who is not Persian and many people who are Persian.
Dr. Katranji, what is the single most important factor that shapes Iran's policies as we know them now?
I think the single most problem is kind of this ethno-religious nationalism that I think is more firmly rooted in its identity as a Persian movement and in a very kind of specific definition of a Persian movement. I think the classic way to look at it is globally, if you go to the Gulf, in many places it's referred to as the Arabian Gulf, Al-Khalij al-Arabi. But obviously in the United States and Iran and other areas, it's also referred to as the Persian Gulf. I think this kind of centers the whole concept, is that there's this divide on the concept of Persia, which is now represented by Iran, at least from the current theocracy that rules Iran. And then there's also the concept of the Arab world. Both are very fluid concepts that haven't, despite this idea of Arabism or Arab nationalism, this idea of Persian and Persian nationalism over the century has never been fully defined and has never had a stable core by which people can revolve around. So it always ends up with this mix of ethnic debate, religious debate, nationalist debate, economic, political debate, until these types of isms are kind of either more clearly defined solidly with an improved social contract buy-in by people. This will continue to kind of flare up and create these conflicts. With Iran, it's been able to take advantage of this kind of vagueness because one minute it acts as an advocate for what it believes is to be Persian policy, and other times it acts as an advocate for what it believes as a anti-Arab policy, in which it would represent interests of groups that are not Arab in the Middle East. And then other times it takes advantage of policies by saying that, we happen to be Shiite. A lot of people don't realize also that Iran in of itself was not Shiite throughout its history. It was actually largely Sunni up until about 325 years ago. So that even the concept of the religious issues are very fluid. But it's for the group that now is empowered within Iran, they take advantage of these fractures to expand a power base that largely goes against a lot of the ethics and the morality of the very people they claim they represent. And I think that that's the driving force, this concept of an inheritor of the Persian Empire that continues from the days of Xerxes until today.
Dr. Katranji, explain to us the reason why Iran switched from Sunnism to Shiism. You said that Iran was originally Sunni, not Shi'i. So what happened?
So basically, there was a emperor, the Khazar, that historically is Ismail Agha, who actually came from the steppes of Russia, from the central core of Russia. And it was a conquering force from they were a Mongol Turk tribe that came down and basically in the chaos that had ensued as the Ilkhanate began falling apart and the Mughal Empire began contracting, the Ottoman Turks were expanding. They kind of seized an opportunity to enter into an area and conquer territories, and then their empire slowly expanded, creating a Shiite state in an area that historically actually has been Sunni. And in those conflicts between the Ottoman Empire and themselves, this kind of continued to be further defined by picking certain ideologies to be able to kind of more clearly define the difference between being Ottoman and then being a Khazar. In that point in time, Iran, whether by mechanisms of oppression or by mechanisms of conversion, or and more often than not, it's political expediency. You always people tend to pay at those times started paying the taxes, whichever was lesser of a burden. So if the Ottoman Empire was like, oh, okay, well, if you're Shiite here, we're going to charge you more taxes, well, they become Sunni. And then if the Khazar are there, then they turn around and say, yep, no, we're Shiite. So, massive conversions, reconversions were very often more of an issue of political and economic expediency than any type of deep devotional commitment.
My next question, and I don't know, I would like to have both guests also respond to it. How much does the Sunni-Shia split shape Iran's decision-making today? Ambassador.
My view, and let me explain that I am not a religious scholar. I'm not a scholar of history between the Persian and Arab peoples, and so I defer to your other guests. I'm a policymaker who thinks from the perspective of what do we do about these things. It's clear that the regime in Tehran has systematically tried to push, if you will, sectarianism. They did it through the militias in Iraq. A lot of people think that the Iranian, if you will, contribution to trying to fight Daesh, ISIS, really consisted of ethnic cleansing, and that in Syria, much the same thing. They have sharpened, if you will, the animus between Shia and Sunni. I can't tell you how many people in Saudi Arabia and Iraq have told me that, and even in Qatar and places, that they're intermarried between Shia and Sunni, that they've spent decades, this was never a factor in their sense of community, and that even in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, in Bahrain, there has been a real subversive effort to stir hatred between the two communities at funerals, at weddings, and there have been incidents that have been reported to me by high-level officials, and they see Iran essentially creating a boiling point, which is a revolutionary factor for them. I have to say that the way this has been introduced, ask yourself this question. If Khomeini and Khamenei got everything they want, if everything succeeded according to their plan, what would happen? Where would we be? Where would the people of Iran be? And I think my question about this empire is that it has no destination. It has no end state. It has no benefit for the people of Iran. It's a power grab. Much of what I have seen and witnessed over 40 years has to do with taking emergency measures to keep the regime in power, no matter who they hurt, or how corrupt they become, or how many people they kill, or how many people they imprison. They have undermined, if you will, the state system by creating non-state infrastructure. And so the question is this really a legitimate project through any eyes? I can't even find, and others, I invite your guests to contradict me, it appears to me they have to pay people to show devotion to the supreme leader. He does not have the kind of charismatic following in the Shia world that he is supposed to have as the presumed embodiment of the 12th Imam of the Prophet. And so as a policymaker, I see a very weak and, if you will, illegitimate regime that is putting on a facade of legitimacy, both religious and political, and taking extreme steps which are in contravention to international norms and certainly not worthy of 2,500 years of Persian culture.
Ambassador Bloomfield, I want you a little later to answer your own question, a very important question. What would be the destination of Iran today had the Khomeini revolution not occurred? But let me first get a response from Dr. Katranji.
I'd have to actually echo my agreement with the ambassador. I think from the modern dynamic that we see existing in the Middle East today, and with Iran's involvement in conflicts in Yemen, in Syria, in Iraq, as a matter of fact, in Libya, in their engagements even, with their historical opposition or opponents, which is in Turkey, it's definitely more of a power grab and an ill-defined power grab. The militias all over these areas that have functioned under Iran's patronage are only there because of Iran's funding of these organizations and groups, very often mercenary and usually criminal in its behavior and its action toward the populations it's supposedly there to serve. So I do believe that this is they tend to take advantage of fractures in a society and placing in those wedge. And the ultimate mission, from my perspective, I think goes to this kind of historical animosity that has kind of been repeatedly bred, is to say, oh, well, this is more about protecting the interests of Persian-speaking peoples. And again, even that's very ill-defined, because you have the Kurds very often in conflict with Iran, who actually are a Persian-speaking derivative. And in so many places within Iran itself, people are severely oppressed. Very often Shiites themselves, who, as the ambassador indicated, are not often in agreement with these, power-grabbing clerics. Without the funds that Iran is able to leverage, and we can even see this with the economic consequences of a lot of the imposed sanctions on Iran, they have to now pick and choose who they're going to support. And in those areas where they're not investing fully like they did before, the very movements that they've stirred up and the conflicts they've stirred up are fading out. So they've had to tactically shift a lot of their financial support because of these economic sanctions away from some of their more global endeavors and keep it focused in the three arenas that they're active in, which is Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. And I think that any policy that we have to engage has to continue to weaken this kind of neo-Iranian empire so that it can no longer cause the harms or the damage that it's causing with its available economic tools.
Ambassador Bloomfield, now, what would have been the destination of Iran had the revolution not succeeded?
Well, I hope I'm going to answer your question correct. If the Shah had stayed in power, it's hard to see, he was dying of cancer. His instruments of power were fading. There were many constituencies who were agitating. Khomeini from Paris had quite a collection of dissidents around him who he later pushed away or could not reach agreement with, because Khomeini was talking about the will of the people and democracy and freedom, and this is what he said in Paris. So people did not see that underneath it was a very dark vision that only emerged when he arrived to the adoring crowds in 1979 in February. Here's what happened. Within the next year or two, a lot of Iranians, there was an open season that Americans did not see because our embassy had been taken hostage in late 79. We stopped reporting. We were obsessed with the hostage crisis. Those of you who are old enough to remember, that's all we cared about was the hostages. And behind that issue was a really interesting period in Iranian history because there was an election season. Khomeini wrote his constitution, and let me point out the one aspect of that constitution that is at the heart of, I think, the controversy is Velayat-e-Faqih, the guardianship of the Islamic jurist, which essentially said the 12th Imam is not visible, he is in occultation, but until such time as he reappears on earth, the supreme leader of Iran will be the embodiment of this divine figure. And that means that no matter what the parliament does, no matter what the president does, the supreme leader can say, no, we will do this instead of that. This person should be killed. In other words, it was total dictatorship. And that was not what most Iranians were expecting. There was a great deal of campaigning among different factions. I mean, Iran is a highly political society. They're very, very bright, very active, very lively. They deserve to have a much more participatory system like America does. But what happened is the clerics became more and more concerned that they were losing control. And the fact is they were losing control. They elected Bani Sadr president, something like 78% of the vote. He was the only person who ever won in a free vote. Only one candidate was excluded. This was Masoud Rajavi, who had met with Khomeini at Khomeini's request. Khomeini asked for his support because he was popular and respected, and he said, I cannot support this formula. So he was, a fatwa was written by hand saying death to him and his followers, and many of them have died. And Bani Sadr won the presidency, but both these two men, Bani Sadr and Rajavi, were campaigning for freedom of speech, freedom of elections, etc. And in June of 1981, they called people out to because martial law was being imposed by the clerics. And in the end, with 500,000 people in the streets of Tehran and 8 other cities, more people, the regime opened fire and started what scholars have called a reign of terror. So the point I'm trying to make is that the clerics came to power. It looked like they came to power with the entire country welcoming them, Khomeini coming off the airplane in February of '79. But within 2 years, he was in the same position as the Shah of Iran. In other words, the people were ready to push him aside, and he knew he was going to lose power, and so they shot their way to power. They are not a legitimate government, and there are many things that I have researched in terms of the deceptions and the kind of the changing of history about Iran-Iraq war, which Khomeini provoked. If you study, he was attacking and assassinating people in southern Iraq and calling for Saddam's overthrow, the puppet of Satan, before the invasion of September 1980, and Iraq made no attacks on Iran. I'm not taking sides here. I'm just trying to show what happened. Khomeini was a very damaging figure in history. And so now you have, when he died, his successor was supposed to be Montazeri, the Grand Marja of Iran, a respected cleric. But because Khomeini was murdering dissidents in jail en masse in 1988, 30,000 people were killed, not one of whom had a death sentence, and many had completed their sentences. But because they were either leftist, secular leftists, or mujahideen, Islamic dissidents, they were murdered. He wanted them all dead, including teenagers and women. And, Montazeri wrote to the imam and said, you can't do this. And not only have his letters come to light, but audio tapes have come to light 2 years ago. And now the United Nations is exploring crimes against humanity against members of this regime. So they have a lot of dark secrets, which I think are the seeds of their undoing. And instead they put in a Hojjatul Islam, which some of you will realize is not a high-ranking cleric, Ali Khamenei, because he was reliable and he would keep the lid on. He would keep them in power. And he has done that. He's been very practical. He stays quiet, but nobody thinks of him as, either a divine figure or a great religious scholar. He's keeping the regime in power, and he's done that effectively. So I have to say, what I'm trying to paint is a picture of illegitimacy, deception, and secrets that they do not want people to know. And at this point, as you know, there are people in the streets of Iran all over the country who are not just complaining about their economic troubles, but they are making political statements and saying no more of this supreme leader. And I think that the young generation is becoming alienated from the clerical message altogether. But I'd welcome your other guest's view on that.
Stay with us. We will continue our discussion after the break.
The Rama Relief Foundation provides humanitarian aid into areas inside of war-torn Syria, as well as aid to the refugees who have fled to the neighboring countries in the Middle East. The foundation offers food baskets, container shipment, mental health, education, soup kitchens, and more. Go to ramarelief.org or call 248-990-4247. Any donation amount made to Rama will go to sustaining many lives. Call now 248-990-4247.
When you're looking for the best in optical care, Dr. Imad Nakash is your doctor to see. With years of experience and thousands of successful procedures performed, you can trust your eyes to Dr. Imad Nakash. See Dr. Imad Nakash and his professional staff for your eye care needs. There's 2 locations to serve you. In Hazel Park, call 248-336-3937. 248-336-3937. In Rochester Hills, call 248-299-3937. That's 248-299-3937.
If halal is important to your family, you can trust that Miramar will offer not only the highest quality halal products, but the best tasting and healthiest foods that can be placed on your family table with confidence. Miramar is the first and oldest halal certified food brand in America, serving the Arab and Muslim community, and offers a wide range of halal food products. Check out Miramar's halal food selection today by visiting Miramar's exclusive distributor, Ziad Brothers Importing, at www.ziad.com.
When it comes to reproductive medicine, IVF Michigan Fertility Centers are the recognized leaders. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 5 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. As a founding member of IVF Michigan Fertility Centers, Dr. Nicholas Shama is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. Dr. Shama has performed over 10,000 IVF cases and has helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. American board certified in both obstetrics and gynecology and reproductive endocrinology and infertility, Dr. Nicholas Shama is a very caring, compassionate, expert physician that understands not only the medical but also the emotional toil of infertility on his patients. When it's time, get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shama at IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio. Call toll-free 855-952-9600, 855-952-9600.
I am Atif Abdel-Jawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Back to our discussion on Radio Baladi, we are talking about Iran policy and historical grievances and how can the Iranian regime provide a better future for the Iranian people by adopting perhaps different policies, and whether or not this will require a regime change. Dr. Katranji is one of our guests who I understand would like to leave. But before you go, Mr. Katranji, let me just ask you, what should happen to make the Iranian people enjoy a brighter future? Is it regime change or what?
You know, I think it's regime change can only really come from people within, right? So it's about getting people into the institutional infrastructures in positions of leadership to be able to then influence and direct a better future for Iran. I think, as the ambassador stated, Khomeini, people may look at him as an inspirational leader, but if you look at the historical gains for the very citizens that he claims to represent, they have largely been disenfranchised and disempowered by some very sneaky, for lack of a better term, sneaky or shifty tactics, so that he and his particular philosophy can maintain power and authority. Because there is a lot of brilliant, bright people in Iran, from positions in high leadership all the way down to a person helping clean the streets. So therefore, you know, regime change has to happen from those individuals themselves. And what they need is political alliances, strategic treaties as it engages Iran that helps advance people who are looking for a brighter future for Iran away from this kind of theocratic dominance into positions of power where when they do win elections, their elections then further empowers them to gain further political, economic, and social gains within the institutions themselves. And that doesn't happen overnight. It will not happen in a year. If you're to pull out Khomeini and Khamenei and put somebody else in, you'll only kind of create chaos unless there's this institutional control and support that gets them in, that maintains that position and also offers a brighter and newer social contract for the people of Iran. This is also shown that when we see Iran in its actions outside, where it's trying to promote certain fractures in society, certain ideologies, its claim is we're going to give you a better life, but all you have to do is look at the buy-in that happened for Khomeini and his group from the late 70s to 80s, and you can ask people, are you really better off today than you were under the Shah? And categorically, people will tell you no. The one advantage that we have in Iran, as opposed to other states, is that Iran does have very strong historic institutions that are still largely stable. And as we engage even with our economic sanctions, we have to be strategic that the sanctions disenfranchise and disempower those people who are in power and seize control, but it still empowers and enables those institutions to be able to advance people that are more in alignment for the interests of the Iranian people as they look for a better and brighter future. And, a happy and stable Iran also is a happy and stable Middle East. These politics of the past, it needs to stop. People in that region need to stop looking at how do I fix a grievance that happened 100, 200, 500 years ago, and start saying, how do I look at their child as they play in the playground going down the slide and say, you know what, my goal isn't to fix a problem that occurred 100 years ago because that's done. My goal is to look at that child and make sure that they're happy, healthy, live long, and prosperous lives.
Dr. Abdul Majid Katranji, thank you very much for joining us. Now, Dr. Fahim Al-Hamid from Saudi Arabia, he is editor of Ukaz and Saudi Gazette, just joined us. Let me have a question for Mr. Al-Hamid, who just joined us from Saudi Arabia. Tell us, Mr. Al-Hamid, what is Saudi Arabia's main concern when it comes to Iran?
Well, assalamu alaikum, first of all, Brother Jawad and the rest of your guests. In fact, I was not able to hear the previous discussion, but I will be directly answering your question. Brother Jawad, we are very much concerned that Iran should be the state of establishment, not a state of sectarianism and waging a sectarian war inside the Arab state, as they have done in Syria, they had done it in Iraq, and they have hijacked Lebanon, and they tried to also get Yemen. The motivation, the desire of the Iranian regime is very, very clear, is to expand the so-called Wilayat al-Faqih, which is a purely Shia terminology in which they want to expand this sect in the Arab region and Islamic region. That's why they have engineered this all wars in the region for domination.
Ambassador Bloomfield, President Trump, if he pursues regime change in Iran, would internal opposition be his most effective tool?
Well, President Trump and Secretary of State Pompeo have said we stand, and Vice President Pence have said we stand with the people of Iran, and they're referring to the protesters. When we look at the people who are protesting in Iran, there are probably many different tendencies. Some of them may be religious, some of them may be less religious, some of them may be older, some young. It's a big country, they have different ethnicities, but we have seen teachers who are not being paid, we have seen truck drivers who cannot afford to pay their bills, we have seen lower income people who invested in bonds, the Caspian bonds, which were supposed to be backed by the state. And then they lost all their money, and they're waiting outside the bank saying, what happened to my money? These are indications of broken trust between the regime and the people. I don't think that either the president or the Democrats would overtly support regime change. It's a very it's a term which is highly controversial here in Washington because it's associated with some of the difficulties with the 2003 intervention in Iraq, which was a regime change action. I do think the term I would use, and you haven't heard it very much, and they won't make it a public policy, because you don't want to make the Americans the target here, but I think there's probably a belief that this clerical regime may be headed for regime collapse. And that's very different, because regime collapse simply means the same thing that happened in 1979, the same thing that was almost happened in June of 1981 when people took to the streets. I am told that in 1999 there was another uprising. In 2009 with the fraudulent elections of Ahmadinejad. Not only in the June of 2009, but in December when the regime went out and tried to arrest people who they thought were guilty of fomenting the troubles. They almost lost control of Tehran, according to my sources. And now, again, in December of 2017, you have seen people take to the streets. The regime for 39 years would never speak about the organized resistance, which is headquartered in Paris and has people in Albania, the Mujahideen Ekhalq, the National Council of Resistance of Iran. But those people, now the regime openly blames them for organizing the protests. And what I would say about the NCRI is that their proposal is not to take over the country. Their proposal is to have a orderly process, which we have seen in many countries around the world in the last 30 years. After a dictatorship falls, an orderly process of writing a constitution and then having elections where every vote counts. And so I think that, again, your other guests have pointed out, the Persian people have a long history. They are civilized people, and many transitions have been successful around the world to a more democratic form of government. And I'm sorry that the Arab Spring had such trouble when it reached Syria, for example. But in this case, I would not be surprised if a regime collapse could lead to a more orderly transition to a more modern form of government.
Dr. Fahim Al-Hamid, as you heard, Ambassador Bloomfield talks about the possibility of regime collapse. Now, if that doesn't happen, under what conditions would Saudi Arabia begin or desire to have a normalized relationship with Iran? What are the conditions that would allow Saudi's relationship with Tehran?
Well, Brother Jawad, I'm speaking under my capacity as an editor and observer. When we speak about regime change, I strongly believe the regime change should be from inside. The economic situation inside Iran is very bad. People are very much striving. Unfortunately, the regime are only building up their weapons, their missile, and more unfortunately that during the 8th year of Obama's regime, this regime, American regime, had fed Khomeini's regime, and they have opened up its own banks account and this and that. So the regime did not spend those millions of dollars for the prosperity of its nation. Rather, they had done it to build up their nuclear weapon. So this is a very big disaster, in fact. So the regime change, the more economic sanction will be tight and strong, the more regime change. But again, the sanction which the current administration they are embarking is need to be troubled, because this regime, we should, tight the sanction to his neck till he's not going to be able to breathe. So the people will revolt against him. Now, what is the condition? The second part, what is the condition to have a normal relation with the regime? This is the question, I believe, Brother Jawad.
Yes, what are the changes in Iran that would meet Saudi Arabia's conditions to have a normalized relationship?
Saudi Arabia do not interfere in the internal affairs of Iran. As a Saudi citizen, yes, I would like to see a regime change in Iran, because the regime change in this regime, which has no institution, it has only, sectarian approach. This regime is like a cancer in the region. So regime change will be definitely, and it will be a very good indication that this region can have good peace and stability. Now, how we could deal with the current regime? We cannot deal with the current regime unless he change his, the ideological Shiite approach. How come we can deal with a regime who only believes in this Shiite terminology? How we can believe in a regime who say bad words against the wives of the Prophet of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? How we could deal with a regime who say very harsh words against the companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and how we could deal with a regime who has killed thousands of the people in Syria and Iraq, and they have hijacked Lebanon, and they have trying to shed more blood in Yemen. Only and only as our crown prince says, that as our deputy in defense minister says, that Iran has to select either to be a state of institution or a state of terrorism.
Stay with us after the break.
Life is a nonprofit charity that's provided humanitarian aid and development to people and communities for over 25 years, regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background. When disaster occurs here or around the world, Life for Relief and Development rushes in to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. Please help improve these efforts. Make your tax-deductible donation to Life now at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493.
Are you going to start a restaurant or grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs? Call Naji Abood at 734-744-9796. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Naji Abood now, 734-744-9796. New Concept Products and Design, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. New Concept Products and Design, new location, 31185 Schoolcraft in Livonia. Learn more at www.newconceptproducts.com. Call Naji Abood, 734-744-9796.
If halal is important to your family, you can trust that Miramar will offer not only the highest quality halal products, but the best tasting and healthiest foods that can be placed on your family table with confidence. Miramar is the first and oldest halal certified food brand in America, serving the Arab and Muslim community, and offers a wide range of halal food products. Check out Miramar's halal food selection today by visiting Miramar's exclusive distributor, Ziad Brothers Importing, at www.ziad.com.
The Rama Relief Foundation provides humanitarian aid into areas inside of war-torn Syria, as well as aid to the refugees who have fled to the neighboring countries in the Middle East. The foundation offers food baskets, container shipment, mental health, education, soup kitchens, and more. Go to ramarelief.org or call 248-990-4247. Any donation amount made to Rama will go to sustaining many lives. Call now 248-990-4247.
I am Atif Abdel Jawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East, live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion on Radio Baladi. We have with us Ambassador Lincoln Bloomfield, former Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs. Ambassador Bloomfield, yesterday, I believe President Putin of Russia called for an international security alliance in Hormuz Straits. That alliance would include the U.S., Europe, Russia, China, India, among other states, Arab states, and so forth. How feasible or realistic that idea?
Well, the question I would have is how necessary is it? You may recall that in 1979, after the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan with 140,000 troops, President Jimmy Carter announced a policy that defense of the Persian Gulf was a vital interest. At that time, there was a strategic concern about the Soviet Union reaching the warm waters of the Gulf. Of course, now Russia is not the Soviet Union. Putin has only recently finally reached the Middle East by having taken over Crimea. He can now get his ships to Tartus in Syria. They have essentially created a foothold in the Middle East. They're selling weapons now, not only to Iraq and to Iran, but also to Turkey, which are quite disruptive to NATO. This controversy about the S-400 air defense system, which may exclude Turkey from the Joint Strike Fighter F-35 program. It's a very big deal. And so Putin, it seems to me, is trying to stir the pot, as we say in Washington. America already has naval forces in the Gulf for 72 years, sailing out of Bahrain. And in this, we've defended the Gulf time and time and time. By the way, it's impossible to have enough escort ships for all of the oil tankers. That is not possible. But in 1988, I was in Kuwait as a Pentagon official with my colleagues, where we made the decision to change the flags on Kuwait's oil tankers to the American flag, and then we defended them. When the Revolutionary Guards pushed too hard, Ronald Reagan, President Reagan, authorized military action, and they sunk a number of these troublesome paramilitary vessels. Iran kept quiet for a long time after that. The question now is, do we need India and Russia to defend international shipping? You have to ask yourself, Putin is looking to become, a global statesman. His country is a permanent member of the UN Security Council. They are a big power, no question. But I don't expect this to happen. We don't have a history of close naval coordination on military affairs between Russia and the United States, or Australia and Britain and these other countries who are helping. So I really am skeptical of this. It's a typical tactic where Putin is taking advantage of the disarray right now politically in the Middle East. But frankly, I think my friends in the Gulf can rest assured that the U.S. Navy is very secure and knows very much how to build coalitions and understands the waters of the Gulf very well, and is committed to international the security and freedom of navigation of the international energy economy, on which our allies, including Japan and Korea, and even China, depends on the flow of oil, as does Taiwan, as do the Southeast Asian countries. So I don't see the need for this. It sounds to me like a little bit of diplomatic mischief.
Dr. Fahim Al-Hamid, similarly at the UN General Assembly, we heard Iran's President Rouhani calling for a security alliance that would include Arab states. How feasible that idea is?
It's not at all feasible. It's not at all practical. Why? Because how come a regime who is responsible to destabilize the security of the region suggests to have arrangement of security? This is completely unacceptable from a president of a regime who has advocate himself and his militia and the Revolutionary Guard to completely sabotage and to ruin the Islamic and Arabian region. And this regime has committed the major mistake by orchestrating, using the weapon against the Saudi Aramco pipelines on the 14th of September. This regime is providing ballistic missile drones to militia, Houthi militia, to be sent to Saudi Arabia. How can a regime who is the master of terrorism in the world can suggest any security plan in the region?
Okay, unfortunately, we don't have somebody to advocate for the Iranian position here and say whether Iran is a terrorist state or not. But Ambassador Bloomfield, in the remaining minutes, what are we heading to now? Are we heading to toward diplomacy or war?
My own view is that President Trump is very strongly against any risk of war. And I think my reading is that Tehran sees this. And that's why you see a lot of activity with President Rouhani, Foreign Minister Zarif, and President Macron of France, trying to get the two of them, Rouhani and Trump, in contact. However, my experience, 8 years in the Pentagon, is that it is false to believe that any military response to Iran would lead to war. I do not believe that. You can look at what Israel is doing. They've conducted dozens of attacks against Iranian positions in Syria. There has been not a word from Tehran about this. So, and I think that if Iran pushes these provocations, like the act of war of attacking two sensitive oil positions in Saudi Arabia, not to mention over 200 ballistic missile strikes from the Houthis in Yemen, these are acts of war. They're totally unacceptable. And if they push too hard, and the Americans could respond with a very brief and very damaging response that would not lead to war. So I think as for diplomacy, there is a possibility. I cannot rule out the possibility of diplomacy. What I would like to see is some accountability. Iran has committed many, many crimes, the latest being the September 14 attack against Saudi Arabia. The answer does not have to be military. These regime figures are guilty of some very serious crimes against humanity in Syria, as you have mentioned, and also inside their country. These are on the par with the Srebrenica massacre. And you saw that the Milosevic and others had to go to The Hague and face International Court of Justice for their crimes. I think that we could see some accountability for senior regime figures. They have done a lot of things. They had terrorist teams in Europe last year in 5 countries. The Argentinians are trying to get to the bottom of the bombings in the 1990s that were approved by Khamenei himself. And so there are issues yet to be determined where the senior figures of the regime must account for their actions. And I think that will lead to more justice for the people of Iran. When they see what these leaders have done, they will act accordingly.
Ambassador Bloomfield, Ambassador Lincoln Bloomfield, thank you very much. I also extend my thanks to Dr. Fahim Al-Hamid of Saudi Arabia. And at the conclusion of the show, I wish you a very pleasant weekend and see you again the first Friday of next month.